pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So thank you all for coming. We are honored to have two important guests with us this evening, Kevin Whitkos and John Hampton, and they're going to share with us some information on the budget and the process. Just for everybody's benefit, we won't have the benefit of the full state budget until after we're probably done, but we certainly always appreciate your guys' insight into what's going on. So, thank you. Yeah, I think we need to use the podium and the microphone because this is recorded. Thank you.
So good evening. Thank you so much for having us here. Great to see Board of Finance members, Board of Ed members, Superintendent, and great to be here with Senator Whitkos at this crazy time of the year and also crazy time in our country and state. Of course, today being March 10th, just a couple hours ago, the governor declared a public state of emergency, which is big news and will have rippling effects, I'm sure, on our towns and on our schools, and already on the legislature. We're going to be closed on Thursday and Friday. Some of you might think that might be good, just that we're closed. I said that to Rob on the way in. Is it good for but we are actually cleaning the building and taking it very seriously and communicating to our constituents as we learn more. There was a conference call yesterday with the governor, and we'll be going into session tomorrow largely to do bonding. So that's news for you. In your handouts, there is on the first page the current budget status for the town of Simsbury, which, the governor introduces his budget at the beginning of the cycle. And then we take that and it goes all the way through the pipeline through appropriates and finance and ends up in our hands and done hopefully by May 5th with any possible adjustments. So the good news is good news for Simsbury thus far, but we remain vigilant, obviously, to protecting your funding. Speaking of which, also in your packet is a bill I've talked to Matt Curtis about, which is 5433, which in essence could impact high-performing districts like ours relative to special education. It's creating a excess cost cooperative. So a lot of our suburban legislators and suburban mayors and first selectmen and folks like you and boards of eds are talking and lobbying and trying to dig deeper and play defense on bills that could possibly are well intended but do harm to high performing districts like ours. So we're really keeping an eye on 5433. Lisa also requested the last 10 years, if you can read it. It's like an eye chart of our state aid and income taxes paid over the last 10 years, just to give you some background information. And then also included was an update on tolls. Lisa asked for, I think most folks know that tolls is dead for now. I don't know if you know different. But there are plans out there, a couple different plans on how to go about funding our infrastructure in a different way. There's questions on town aid, and tomorrow we are expected to go in and complete the bonding package, which will hopefully alleviate some of the stress and uncertainty on our municipalities.
It's like 6 minutes.
I'm concerned about just general changes to the budgets. I'm sure Kevin's watching too for possible increases to a budget. There's talk of new programs, new initiatives that could add to the budget. Some of us have put in legislation that would hopefully reduce our budget, like removing pensions and overtime from, mileage and overtime from pensions, things like that, and more pro-business, pro-economic success legislation. So we're watching very carefully on any legislation that could do any harm to our economy, to our towns, because we hear from our citizens all the time that they are overtaxed and overburdened. So I'll turn it over to you to add anything. Senator Whitcombs, thanks for being with me.
Sure, thank you, John. Thank you for having us here this evening. You can pretty much count on what you see in front of you as your dollars, fairly certain of that. The formula has not changed for the ECS, so, well, pretty much dependent upon your student population, you're going to get that money. The lot SIP and Town Aid Road, although it will be part of the bond package that is voted upon tomorrow, there won't be a release, obviously, until the bond commission meets, and that's generally not till the end of the month. The governor has in the bond package an additional $30 million for STEEP in the second year. He's still got a $15 million release that they're rewriting it from the Lamont administration, from the Malloy administration, the criteria for that. Governor Lamont is focusing on transit-oriented development projects, housing, and infrastructure. So if it doesn't fit one of those three categories, don't bother submitting because you're not going to get anything. So if you want to put in a STEEP grant application, you've got to try to fit it within one of those three buckets. Right now, Simsbury.
Infrastructure mean?
What's that?
What does infrastructure mean?
Like sewer
Sewers.
projects, things like that. Forget about sidewalks.
Playing fields.
Streetscapes, those, they would say, that should go through your lots of funds if you want to use it for that. Simsbury, right now, you'd have to check with the town manager, but you are not eligible for a STEEP grant right now. You have an open one still. It's about $120,000, I think, remains in that balance. So he is not allowing any towns to apply for one if you still have an open one. So you'll have to want to make sure you get that cleared out through OPM before you apply for anything new. And that, I had a conversation with Maria, that went back to like 2012.
Yep.
And there was some, I guess, a cobbling of a couple different projects together where there was some design things, and the project
Riverside
was just, right, never fully completed. So that's where that stands. The budget's going to pretty much remain the same. You know, we're looking at Governor Lamont is looking at a $34 million revenue increase, if you will, in this year's budget. A lot of that is attributable to the 10% corporate surcharge tax that was supposed to sunset this year. They're putting that on the books to maintain as is. An additional increase on vaping, the electronic cigarettes. That's another large portion of that revenue stream. And lastly, there's about $7.5 million, I'd say, that they anticipate from a captive reinsurance market. There's some appropriations to allow some of the different state agencies to go out and attend different conferences, although we have a ban on travel now in the state. And there are hopes to, some other legislation to entice some of them to bring their headquarters to be headquartered back here in the state of Connecticut. And so they anticipate that'll run about $7.5 million in increased revenue just from the normal course of business. In the package for tomorrow, there's about $130 million additionally from his original budget for transportation. That's going to make up the difference in the toll package that is not going to happen this legislative session. There's also an additional money which Simsbury could avail themselves of, and we're monitoring this because it's a huge dollar amount. And unfortunately, when you try to look at how the bonding package is, it's not individualized. Most of the things. Only 2 of the items are individualized per town, so you can't see which town's looking for the pork, if you will, or the rats. East Hartford is getting $10 million each year for economic development activities, and that's all it says. So we'll be questioning that on the floor of the Senate tomorrow. And then there's some monies for the XL Center. I think it's $25 million.
Yeah, how many times are we going to rebuild that thing?
So that's in the package. But other than that, there's a huge increase of $25 million on top of what's already allocated for the Urban Act program. And any community in Connecticut can apply for that. There's certain criteria that you have to meet. Some of those are distressed municipalities, so wouldn't fit here. Some of them have to be based on population, that wouldn't fit here. But there are some programs that if you apply for within those programs, basically it's writing a letter to OPM, and I can send that to the town manager. So she'll have it, and I can send it to the board too, if you'd like to see what those criteria
Yeah.
are.
Yeah, that'd be
And
great.
the application process. So, but there's an additional $25 million in the bonding package this year for each of those programs, in addition to what was already in there before. So that's pretty much it. Everything fairly remains the same. But we're in unprecedented times this year in the legislature. The leaders met a couple days ago and to discuss the coronavirus and what's happening. The governor was on a conference call just before the leaders met with all the governors and vice president, and shared that the states that are having the problems now, Washington State, New York, and California, they urge that other states not follow their example, to be preemptive, to be more precautionary than wait to see what happens. So that's why Connecticut is moving in that direction. We are now the 7th state in the nation to declare a public health emergency as of today, and I think you'll see more of that. What that does, part of the reason why Governor Lamont wanted to do that was because it allows the first selectman, the CEO of the communities, to have certain powers that they wouldn't have unless the president or the governor declared that. So he wanted to make sure that happened. So if a need arises locally, they have the authority to act. The legislature, as John said, today all public events were canceled. It was just strictly legislative business. Tomorrow, all public hearings were canceled. The Senate and House are going in at noon tomorrow. You guys are going to get the bond bill first. We'll get it right after them. And then the building's closed for the next 2 days. All the staff are off. One of the things I don't agree with was that if the staff works from home on Thursday or Friday, then they're going to get comp time on top of their original salary, which didn't make any sense to me. But it's because the state doesn't have a telecommuting policy now, so they have to do it since the building is closed. So we're going to monitor that to see who actually says they're working from home on Thursday and Friday to get comp time. That's something that's unexpected, but I think we'll deal with that. But going forward, there's been conversations, I think, that if more individuals are testing positive for coronavirus, the legislature, not certain yet, but we've had conversations that we may only do certain bills and then call it a session, and that's it. And those bills would be the budget bills, anything that we would have to do to accommodate requirements from the federal government, with Medicare, Medicaid, any transportation initiatives. So all the other things that are out there, they're just going to die. They want to keep people out of that building because if the state's the one that's out there declaring these things with all the commissioners, the thought is we need to lead by example, so we're going to show that. And, I'm sure you've all seen if you haven't, right now they're just urging any public events greater than 100, try not to have those, if you will. The Hartford St. Patrick's Day Parade was canceled today. And that's pretty much it. So we're in uncharted territory. I don't think the bill that John mentioned about the special education, I don't think that's going to go anywhere. The rep that put that in is just way out there. It was last minute. Something like that takes time. There is a group called the school choice, not school choice, the school funding initiative, I think. It's the Katie Roy and Lisa Hammersley. And that is warming up to legislators. And what that does, it kind of creates a collaborative, but it sets a constant that towns pay for special education costs, and you never see a spike. So you can budget appropriately. And that is, as they get around the building and start introducing that concept to legislators, it's becoming more amenable to folks, and they're starting to understand it. I don't know what the school's perspective is on that project, but from a legislative standpoint, I think you may see that happen in the next 4 or 5 years. But that's just tiptoeing, going through. But that, I think, the numbers that you see tonight, the numbers you can count on for budgetary purposes.
But we were still watching that.
Yeah, I just think
Yeah.
one of the challenges, to your point, Kevin, is it came late, came at a time when everybody's buried on the other issues.
And no notice.
They don't have any modeling for what it would look like
Correct.
and
Yeah.
play out like in a community that they could make people comfortable with at this point.
Yeah, and the only other thing you have to watch out for, while you'll get the money on, on your revenue side, there's a lot of bills in the labor committee that are really bad, that'll affect your staff. and your seasonal help as well.
Captive
And that'll
audience.
be a cost factor that you'd have to
What
consider.
are those?
Captive audience.
Captive audience, predictive scheduling. You have to give X amount of notice in advance if you change somebody's schedule. And the employee has to agree to it, otherwise you can't, you have to pay them anyways. So those types of initiatives,
Not onerous bills.
yeah, so we're monitoring those as well. But they may never come to fruition if, what happens with what's going on at the national level.
And as Linda knows, constitutionally, the only thing we should actually be doing this year is
The budget.
the budget. So the rest is actually just superfluous, so.
Can I make one comment on the, to go back to the steep grant priorities that they have? I know you guys know this, but, you know, everything is always skewed toward the urban districts, which leaves us out. And, you know, when they start talking about priorities for housing, public transit, that kind of stuff, you know, you're not going to be seeing a lot of public transit bills or projects in a rural or even suburban community unless it's real close into a city. And it does get frustrating, I'm sure, for you as well, that, you know, steep used to be something that was for every town to be able to take advantage of,
Absolutely.
and now even that's going to be all sort of siphoned towards just the cities.
Yeah.
Well, it has a population max. I think it's 35,000, so any city that has excess population of 35,000, with the exception of, I think, Torrington's the only one that was given special permission to apply for that, so they're not eligible for steep grants. And I think that's the reason why, honestly, Governor Malloy didn't fund steep for 5 years.
Yeah.
The last 5 years of his administration, he just didn't give out any money in
Right.
steep.
Right. But still going to be a challenge, I mean, I need to see their priorities, but it sort of sounds to me like they're making it a little difficult for small towns
Oh,
to
yeah.
actually come up with a public transit kind of.
Well, he needs to fit it in, and public transit could be, you know, if you're talking about the bicycle community, somehow working that into it. The governor, because he needs to stay true to his debt diet,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
And so he's
Yeah.
trying to say that, I want to be true to my debt diet, but I also want the towns to avail themselves of projects that fit within my scope of what I envision as appropriate state funding.
Kevin and John, thank you both for being here, first of all. Really appreciate it and appreciate the update and the work you guys are doing. Good fiscal stewards for Simsbury, thank you. So the first question I have is really about the coronavirus and the state of the emergency. If you can, from a financial perspective, if you can talk a little bit about risk assessment the state is doing, how you see any spending going on from the state level down to the town level, and how you see reimbursements playing out between locals, state and federal. I don't know if you've even gotten to that point yet, but I was just wondering, are you anticipating these to be big numbers? I mean, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this.
I don't know, the governor, I don't know what came out of the governor's press conference today. Did you see his,
Well,
press
because in the leadership, yeah.
Yeah.
So the governor has activated his emergency operations team. They are in the Armory. It's on a partial opening 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. And he's activated all the emergency service functions that are applicable in this case, whether one's finance, one's mass messaging, one's public health, one is public safety. There were two more, I don't remember what they are. And so right now, it's just education of the public. They don't know of any cost. What they're finding that our supplies are starting to be difficult. So the state has opened up an emergency procurement for, this is good for Board of Selectmen, for their first responders, that they can speak to their regional dentist coordinator if they need additional supplies, whether it's, sanitizer, the masks, the suits. They've also signed an emergency declaration really for the schools, because we had a state statute that only allowed green products for cleaning solutions. They've since changed that now and said you can use bleach or whatever you can get your hands on to clean, because there was just no supplies there. So it's a positive reaction to something, and I think we're taking it on a day-by-day basis. I know weekly there's a conference call for the leaders to say, where are we now? There are, the state owns two, if you haven't heard the news, the state owns two kits that can test for coronavirus, and each kit holds 600 samples. They're allowed, they can turn those around in a 5-hour time frame. Quest Labs and one other lab should be operational by the end of next week. We don't know the turnaround time for them as well. There is mobile, I want to say, I don't know the word I want to use, mobile triage, if you will. So when somebody goes to the hospital, they think they're suffering symptoms, they'll be met outside, and swabs will be given then. The governor has placed a no visitation in nursing homes unless the family member is actually dying. That's the only time a family member will be allowed in, and it will be maximum of 2 at a time. So we're really ratcheting it up to make sure that we isolate exposure, if you will. But nothing as far as towns should start documenting expenses, because if it goes down, then the state's willing to, or will, enter into a cooperative arrangement to pay for something. And who knows what the federal government says. It's just going on right now. So as we hear things, we
Pass
share
them
them.
along through our email blasts. And
And then for Matt and Maria, do we have telecommuting policies in place?
We don't have a telecommuting policy. Several weeks ago, the Commissioner of Education talked to boards of education about starting to look at distance learning, what your technology capabilities are. So we've had several meetings on that front. It's interesting, there was a conference call I guess it was yesterday evening, that superintendents were in on with a lot of the commissioners. Documentation was sent with that. They have not waived the 180-day requirement. And in fact, the commissioner recommended that for short-term closures, up to 2 weeks, you did not use distant learning because of the complexities with special education, compliance laws, and all the uncertainties. There's a waiver that you can put in for to use distance learning at this point. There's a lot of kind of legal weighing in on whether that's worth doing or not without more information, because it absolves the State Department of Education from any responsibility and puts it all back on the local district. So we're in process, as this information is so dynamic and changing, to try to evaluate those things so we can best communicate them.
Yeah.
Because those are the questions that
Washington-
people have at this point.
Some of the Washington schools are using distance learning.
Right.
I'll share with you the past precedent. It's different Commissioner of Education, but back in 2012 or 14, when the H1N1 was prevalent, the town of we were in April, and the town of Granby had to close one of their schools for 7 days. And they applied for a waiver from the 180 days, and they were denied. They said, nope, these kids have to be in school 180 days. So they were very, very firm about that 180-day limit. But what they allowed was to allow school to be held on a Saturday for 4 hours, and that would count towards the full day. So, and I heard, as Matt said, that the commissioner said, well, if you're losing time now, don't have a vacation and go to the end of June. So they're really very reluctant about
The
waiving
180
any
right now.
180 days, yeah.
And that's a state board decision, not just a
Right.
commissioner
Yep.
decision.
Maria, do you guys have, I mean, I know you're mostly a service organization, it's difficult to do some telecommuting, but obviously there is some that can be done, and do we have anything in place for that?
We don't have a formal telecommuting policy. All of our upper level managers do have, their work devices are portable, and they're set up with remote access, so all of our upper level managers and a handful of our sort of key mid-level managers have that as well, so they do have the ability to work remotely.
And the message from the governor is they're trying to urge communities to really work with their, in our case, it would be the Farmington Valley Health District, on any issues, and it'll bubble up.
Yeah. We have a meeting with the health district tomorrow morning, area superintendents, so that should be informative.
Okay, thank you.
Art, anything?
I'm curious as to if we did go into shutdown, is there any thought been given as to what the costs would be to our budget? Both for municipal and for education would be, I assume there would be mixed, there would be savings and there would be expenditures. Has anyone looked at what the net effect of that might be?
Don't have that level of detail yet, Art. I know we just started talking on the athletic side this evening with the athletic director, because the CIAC came out and canceled all state tournament games, which then next brings into question, what will you do about spring sports? So spring sports in general bring a considerable amount of gate revenue for us that we offset a lot of our costs that aren't in the operating side, but make us more efficient on that operating side. So we're starting to put those things together, but I don't have total cost on any of that information at this point.
One of the things that they shared too is that 80% of the population will self-quarantine at home, will be fine. 15% will require hospitalization, the other 5% is the concern. It's generally people 70 years of age and older that have a health issue already in advance. And another point what Matt was talking I wanted to bring up. Oh, and they anticipate the coronavirus could be around till July, is what they're saying is, people say, well, as soon as warm weather gets here, it will dissipate maybe like the flu, but they said, no, it's till July. In the latest time that somebody can show that they may, from the time they're exposed to incubation to the show something, could be a 28-day period. So you may not be 3 or 4 days after you've met with somebody that has that. It's a 20, on the longest side, it's 28 days. It's a full
Do you have a
month.
sense of what they're basing the July month on?
I think they're trying to base on when the month of, not necessarily the warm weather, but the duration and us getting involved in self-quarantining. And I think that was based on what happened in China
They're
because
thinking we're going to contain it.
the vice president shared
Good luck.
with the folks on the call that in China it's decelerating, whereas in the U.S. it's accelerating.
Right.
And so more to be seen, and that's why the state's trying to do what they can to get procedures in place, and you're just going to see, you'll start seeing a lot more communication with the towns going forward, I think, on a weekly basis and then as needed basis.
Well, let's hope.
As you do your financial analysis, if you could just keep this board abreast of where the gaps are. I mean, obviously, the Performing Arts Center is at risk, graduation, things like that. And to what you just mentioned, let us know what you need so we can start planning for it as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. Keep in
Appreciate it.
touch. We'll keep in touch
right.
with you as well.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Art, I want to thank you for asking that question. Offense is the best defense. I thought they were going to ask us if we knew what the financial impact was. All right. So our main item of business tonight is a presentation of the Board of Education 2020-2021 budget. And I'll turn it over to Matt, and I appreciate everyone here being here.
Excuse me, point of order. Lisa, we can't hear you back here. Can you speak up when you're speaking? So we don't want to miss anything.
So the mic.
Yes.
So the mic actually doesn't amplify, but we can speak up so that you can hear us. All right.
You could sit in the front row too, Lydia.
The cheap seats are complaining.
Yeah. All right, Matt, it's your show.
Oh, wonderful. All right. So wanted to thank you, first of all, for having an opportunity to come in and share our budget with you this evening. I have with me Kira Sheehan, who is our budget analyst and accountant, and Amy has been a great support really on the pension and insurance side in Burke's absence. So I think this is the 9th time I've had an opportunity to do this with the Board of Finance. So I've tried to streamline this PowerPoint from when I first started of 25 slides to pare it down to what I think is what we want to be talking about. So less pictures and more money figures I see Sean with the thumbs up back there, from the superintendent. So, and we'll certainly answer any questions along the way. So thanks again. I wanted to talk a little bit about the process because I think it's come together for us in the past few years and has worked pretty effectively. And that is, we start our work back in that November timeframe with that tri-board meeting. And I do believe that the guidance that we're given in those conversations really helps to frame our conversations as a board and helps to frame conversations with our administrators and put things into context. So I think that's been helpful. Building principals and our program directors develop their program-based budgets and their building-based budgets in the December timeframe, and then we come forward to the Board of Ed and have a series of what are different presentations as we work through, really culminating in February with I pull it all together, present to the Board of Education. We have a workshop, we review the line items and the grants as the major areas of focus, and then we end up in front of you here today to discuss what the Board of Ed has approved. So our budget for this school year is a little bit over $72 million. It's a 2.27 percent increase. That is without that 6.5% pension assumption in it, but the way I've kind of staggered things throughout, I'll demonstrate to you some different thoughts on how we can address that as we move through.
So, Matt, just, can I interrupt for a moment? This isn't the same set of numbers?
So, is that from the booklet?
Yes.
Okay, so when I initially presented to the Board of Education the budget that they approved, I had to go back because we had a slightly updated OPEB information that increased it, I think, from what, like a
Okay.
2.12 to a 2.27.
Exactly right.
Yep.
Yep.
Could you email us just a copy of this?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
Yep. So that's the only line item that's changed.
Okay.
I think it was about 80,000, I can't remember. So just in terms of factors that really impact what we do and define is that you've heard us talk a lot throughout the year in our facilities task force work around the shifting K-6 enrollment. Certainly that 2.5% guideline that we spoke about early on. Board of Finance had mentioned a desire to keep that mill rate under 40. We're always looking. As you've become familiar with this model of continuous improvement, what are the areas that align with our strategic planning, with our Board of Education goals that we can nudge forward and continue to improve? And then we talked about that adjustment in the pension rate and what it would do on the operating side. Always trying to balance out the reality of where we are in a fiscal climate with our desires to continue our excellent academic programs in our school system. We value our class size guidelines and what we can do to keep things within those guidelines, address, as I mentioned, enrollment shifts. And we talk about a new capstone requirement that as we go through, if you have questions on, we can discuss. And really important to retain our talented staff. So just some kind of contextual information we always like to provide. Audited number in per pupil expenditure, an increase, and this is lag year data, as I know you're familiar with. But this is audited by the state of Connecticut. We provide that to them in our major financial reports on an annual basis. This is actually I think here, if I'm right, the smallest percentage increase we've had in the last decade. A lot of that obviously is because our enrollment has stabilized. And this is an equation that is really largely enrollment driven. Put some peer communities there so you can see what their per pupil expenditures are. And this is all data that's readily accessible on the State Department of Ed website. So just a little bit on enrollment, and I know we've provided more detailed reports in your supplementary materials, but we're seeing a decline at the secondary level. So Simsbury High School now, as some of those smaller cohorts have worked their way through, those classes are getting smaller and the enrollment's dipping at the high school and being offset by now the tide has turned at the elementary level. So what you're really getting for the next couple years here are an even enrollment. So as we look, it's kind of responding to those needs at the elementary level and seeing if we can offset those needs at the secondary level from a staffing standpoint. So I include a little bit of trend information of what our projections from Malone and McBroom say will happen in a 5-year period. Pretty significant increase at the elementary level of almost 300 students. And then you see how that plays out at the district level overall at the 10-year enrollment. I know, Linda, you had asked about, and I think it's an interesting question, and Neil and I will talk to Malone and McBroom as we're making large-scale decisions on capacity and enrollment. How do you get a handle for after the window that the data is provided? And, we can talk to them about giving us more of an extension on the enrollment. The reality of what they tell us is they feel good about 5 years. After 5 years, it gets a little shakier. After that, they're taking a trend line and just kind of riding it out. So it's probably data we can get. How reliable it'll be, I don't know.
Right.
So did I see in here, Matt, that the largest cohort is the 12th grade? Is that true, Neil? Right.
Largest cohort are definitely the high school cohort.
Moving out right now. Yeah.
So, and how do they compare with the large cohorts that are at down to K and 1? Are they equivalent in size? So are we expecting the high school to continue to go down, and then when does that turn back up?
It turns back up in about 5 or 6
5, 6
years.
years.
Okay.
At the high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where
But I
you'll
think your
again
question is,
probably have
will-
No, I was
cohorts-
really-
You'll have cohorts again of 300.
When
right?
first
Over
grade
300.
gets to ninth grade, it's not going to be bigger than ninth grade is now, right?
Say that again?
When the first graders get to be
It'll be
ninth
smaller.
graders, that will be a smaller
Smaller
group
cohort.
than
That's really
what's in
what I
there
was,
now.
that was what I was
That's
getting
what you were
at.
asking.
Yeah,
Yeah, well.
Thank you, Linda.
Their projections, their demographic projections will tell you that you're doing a little addition all the way along. So that what looks like a first grade cohort
Might
now of
change,
270
Might add 25
becomes
or 30.
275, 280, like over time, it builds. So I think you're right at the point where they're predicting a stability over that 10-year period.
Okay.
Again, a little more context. These are conversations we have on an annual basis and come up. It's staffing snapshot, what has happened with enrollment over time, or what has happened with staffing over time as enrollment has gotten smaller. It depends on the year you pick. Linda and I have had conversations over this in the past, but 08, 09 is kind of a high water mark or close to it for enrollment. It was actually a high water mark for staffing. Rather than show all the data, which we give you historically, we just give kind of a 3-year shot, a snapshot to take a look at where we've declined close to 10 FTE over the last 3 budgets. In this presentation, as we'll show you shortly, it's a slight decline of 1.5 FTE in total.
I have a related question. Am I correct in remembering that the amount of FTEs and cost associated with educating a high school kid is greater than, right? So as the high school kids go down, you might get a little bit of at least relief on the staffing side, even though you're going to have a growing population on the grammar school side. Okay.
One slide that this just demonstrates and connects to our strategic planning. The student growth and success is our Board of Education Goal 2, and the different accountability indexes that we're responsible for. So the state has shifted. It's interesting. 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, it was really a look at standardized measures and how schools ranked across those measures. So your SAT scores, your CMT scores were the tests. Those measures have shifted. There's new standardized assessments that our students take. But what we have now is more of a composite accountability index that the state has created. That's a variety, I think 13 or 14 different bullets that go into creating this number, from how your highest needs students and free and reduced lunch students perform, to arts access opportunities, to how your students perform on physical education assessments, and how your students perform overall on standardized measures. So all that gets rolled in to a district accountability index, and this just is a snapshot of what that looks like compared to like districts. So by these measures, we do well. And you can get individual school reports on this, and we can use these reports now to kind of inform different decisions we make, which is pretty interesting. I mean, a different way to look at things. On the right is a representation of really, we call them our learning clusters. They're very timely now, as the state has come back and kind of placed new mandates on us in terms of capstone requirements and aligning student interest areas with graduation outcomes. So this actually goes back to Neil's tenure as principal at Simsbury High School. They did a really good job of articulating different course sequences in each of these areas for kids to go into and kind of build their experiences. So it is one of those things that I truly believe separates Simsbury High School from other high schools, is that we have a much more varied and exciting opportunities for kids. Does that sometimes lead to smaller class sizes in certain areas? It is. Those are conversations we've had across multiple boards, but I know it's something that our board and our community members have been very supportive of.
Matt, before you get off
Yeah.
that, what do you measure? I mean, I understand math, reading, science scores. I mean, what do you measure when you measure accountability? What are the factors that go in that give you a numerical outcome?
Right. So it's a state index equation. It's derived at the state.
But what's in it is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so I can't give you the math behind it right now, Art. I mean, I have that, but there's 13 different points that go into that. There's graduation rate, There's how your special education and free and reduced lunch students perform in comparison to your other students.
Access to the
Chronic.
arts.
Access to the arts, physical education.
How many of those are
testing.
qualitative measurements versus qualitative?
opposed to
That's, I
testing.
think,
They're
is
they're
that-
all quantitative. They're all quantitative.
Okay.
So, it's actually a presentation we're giving to our board at our next board meeting. I can send that to you guys in terms of, you can actually look at the breakdown of each one of the reports for the schools and for the district. It's pretty interesting.
Is academic achievement included?
Yes, so your SAT scores are in there, your SBAC, which is the test that students take in grades 3 through 8, is one of the measures too.
And so the capstone thing that you've talked about.
Yes.
Is that each kid is going to have to do a project. And that's a new, like, they don't have to do those kind of senior projects now, or do they
Some
already have
courses that we have in these electives have that already wired in, which is to our benefit.
Yeah.
So we have certain areas, particularly in these kind of start areas that you see that kids can go into that will have a natural capstone experience, but they'll probably be, we estimate, probably 120 to 130 students that may not fit into that wheelhouse that we have to develop projects for.
Yeah, it's a
And
real
that new
challenge. It's a
position,
lot of
it's,
work.
it's the curriculum writing, it's the research,
Yeah.
and it's the support of those kids to
Yeah.
make sure they get what
And
they need.
that's a state mandated?
It's a state mandate.
When you seek to increase that score, what do you focus on?
Yeah, a lot of those different areas, they're
Are
tied.
no priorities?
We do have priorities. They're tied directly to our strategic plan. So an example would be at the elementary level, third grade reading score. While our overall reading scores are very high, our third grade reading score in comparison is not. So what do we do at the localized school level with our intervention programs and the conversations with teachers that we can do differently to lift those scores? So it's interesting, not to get too far off the beaten path, but our strategic plan and our Board of Ed goals tied to our administrative evaluation plan, which ties right to our teacher evaluation plan in a quantitative way.
So you
So
do
it
have-
actually has a pretty good coherent tie-out structurally that we're still working on the elements of how it carries out, but it's pretty coherent.
So do you look at the factors annually and come up with an annual strategy of how to increase the accountability index?
We do.
Matt, just the accountability index, I know there was at one point you guys measured yourselves internationally. Do you still do that?
We haven't had the PISA test in a
You only get
while.
that data every couple of years.
Yeah.
And you get chosen by this PISA organization to test, and I don't remember us getting chosen for the last few years.
It was
Yeah.
2013, I think, was the last one.
Yeah.
I'd be curious as to how we progress in the PISA
Well,
evaluation.
you don't get to volunteer for the
You
test.
Yeah, that's why.
The U.S. Department of Education tells you you're participating.
So, next piece of this is just kind of the straightforward numbers, but at a higher level, kind of the major drivers. Really looking at our contractual obligations, some of the program improvements I'd like to talk about, and then the other main driver is really the pension and insurance. So this is that format which we've all become pretty familiar that we operate off of, that I think gives a concise look to where we at. But when you initially roll forward, and this is not an enrollment snapshot of this is just taking the contracts and rolling them forward. You can see the largest contract, obviously our teacher's contract, the other contracts that have been settled, and then what we talk about is the reserve, the impact of staff contracts to be settled right now. So we just started negotiations with our SFEP bargaining group, which is our second largest group. It's a pretty significant sized group. So the settlement, the estimates for the settlement will be there. What we have to hand out later is, I know it's a question that's come up, what does that reserve category look like from prior year budget when you go and place it in the category? So we have a handout for you on that later, and then we can work through that if you have any questions.
What does SFEP stand for?
Oh, you're gonna get me on the
Simsbury Federation of Education Professionals, it's our
Clerical.
secretaries and our paraprofessionals.
Clerical, yeah.
So we look at the rollover, it's about a 1.95% increase. We estimate 10 staff retirements. That's a number that when we look past historically, that we feel comfortable with. I think we're already up to 6 or 7 that are solid on that. And for a new board member, I know the others have heard this, how we kind of figure in those potential cost savings are. That's the cost of a teacher going out at max contract and hiring somebody in the middle of the range. And we look at about a $25,000 savings for each of those positions.
Have we always used 25? I thought it was more like 50, but, you know,
25.
forever, okay.
Yeah.
It's just bad memory. All right.
So when we look at building the budget and building categories and kind of presenting them to our board, we look at academic enhancements, what we do for student supports, and then how we can offset potential costs. So that's what this chart tries to get at. So at the elementary level, at Latimer Lane School and Squadron Line School, enrollment's going to dictate that we add 2 teachers, 1 each to those schools. They're in first grade. Without the benefit of adding those teachers, we would have classes of 26 and 27 in first grade, which are just not functionable size classes for the type of work that we have to do in the primary grades. Also, an additional half a teaching position at Latimer Lane School in special education. So as the overall population increases, so does our special ed population. We've kind of taught, we don't have them in this year's budget presentation, but we've demonstrated before that actually that population in our district increases at a rate that's higher than our general ed population. So this is a matter of caseload and service hours and the ability to manage and deliver programming for students. So we think we can do that with a additional resource at Latimer Lane School. The kind of new piece in this budget is that capstone position that we talked about. That's a teacher contract position. It'll sit in the teacher bargaining group. We're calling it kind of a semi-leadership position. One of our challenges in education is we don't have a lot of avenues that we can put people that aspire to do things beyond just traditional classwork in. So when we provided the write-up to you, I know if you read that, it almost sounds like an administrative position, but it'll certainly student contact time, but there's curricular work there, there's professional development work, and it's interest that really has, a position rather that has a lot of early interest from our faculty members. So I see that as being a position that one of our current staff members transitions to, which is pretty exciting. We're looking to reduce 3 full-time equivalent positions at Simsbury High School that are enrollment related. That's really the work of Neil's office in conjunction with Simsbury High School when they go through the master scheduling process. So we've just initiated that now, and we'll be able to do that without really impacting courses or programs in a negative way.
So no electives are being eliminated, this is just...
No programs. I mean, there may be some
Programs.
shavings of different classes, but they're enrollment driven. You know what I mean, Rob? It's class sizes would dictate, if you go down a 0.4 or you go down a, one less class. But there's no programs being eliminated in this year's budget.
Matt, do you still do that by hand, or do you have a system now that helps you do
There's a
scheduling?
system, but they still keep that beautiful chart. They're not taking that 30-foot chart off of the wall of the master schedule and how it plays out. But it's a data-driven system in terms of students signing up for courses electronically, and then us analyzing where they sit and moving things around.
Is that an opportunity to make your lives easier? To look, I know some of the, obviously colleges don't have the big board, and different schools, is that an opportunity for you guys to make your lives easier, or no?
I think it's always...
I think we make better decisions when we come, I work with the middle school and the high school, actually more the assistant principals, and then we bring the principals into the loop about decisions we're making around that. So it's all on the, like, who's signing up for what courses is all driven electronically and working really well. Then we look at the data that we have, we make some really conscious people decisions, because we're looking to capture sometimes, a computer wouldn't understand, well, maybe we'll capture an FTE here because we have a retirement in that department.
Right.
And therefore, we won't have to lay off a real person who's working in our school district. We can capture that retirement, have that department be appropriately sized if we capture that department, and achieve that kind of 3.0 that way. So I think it's very strategic, but then when we go to build the schedule, the computer takes over again.
Got it.
So you're a fan of actual intelligence, not artificial intelligence?
Still AI.
Yeah, right. And then on the non-certified side, with as people transition, this is an area we see turnover from year to year. that we will analyze both, non-certified positions, which are largely paraeducator positions, has been staffing that we've seen increase over time with the needs of our special education students, and to look to find some efficiencies between all of our non-certified groups, whether that's unaffiliated, clerical, or in that paraeducator group. So those are decisions that haven't been made yet, but we feel comfortable that we can find some efficiency there.
Just for my benefit, the two teachers at Latimer and Squadron Line, you said the classes would have been 26 or 27. So how many first grade classes are there at each of those schools?
So Latimer's going back up to 4 when it's been at 3, and Squadron's going back up to 5, which it hasn't been in several years.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
3 to 4 and 4 to 5.
You got it.
Okay, excellent.
This is just a summary of what I just showed you, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it does demonstrate the net, and that we would be going down 1.5 positions with what is basically a even enrollment projection. So then we roll it all up, and it's the same contractual information now with the new staffing requests in there, and we can take a look at what the insurance numbers are as well. I think, and you're aware of this, when we first provided fixed costs to the Board of Finance, both the town and the Board of Education, I think we were looking at like a 9% insurance increase. So certainly we've been the benefit this year of some favorable insurance information that has come in that has allowed us to lower this overall fixed cost, which I think benefits everybody.
I don't have it either.
This information does not have the 6.5% assumption rate in it. So when you roll all that forward, it's a 3.31% increase. And then you move off of that, the reductions that we talked about in staffing. And then we have a pretty substantial, what will probably be a 1-year reduction in technology. That's just a benefit of where we are with the replacement planning, $51,000, which brings us to a 2.27% overall increase over last year's spending. And then I have I have 2 more slides. A slide on projected use of the non-lapsing dollars, which I know are for discussion, maybe later on tonight or as we continue to move through this process. But we currently have $385,000 in that non-lapsing fund. Decisions on how we use that money are joint decisions of the Board of Finance and the Board of Education based on recommendations that I've brought forward in the past. So we project this year in our current budget to offset some deficits, primarily in district special education outplacements, that we would utilize some of that funding, but also potentially $175,000 of that money to offset the OPEB and pension costs should we move forward with the increase to the 6.5%. So if we rolled that piece in, this second busy sheet just demonstrates us absorbing the assumption rate of 6.5, which is about a $400,000 increase overall in our operating cost, and what it would look like if we took off that $175,000, utilizing the non-lapsing fund, pulls us right back down to that target of 2.5.
So just to be clear, the use of the $210,000 is already in there.
It's for current year.
The year we're in.
The year we're in.
Yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
okay.
Can you go
But we can
back
potentially
one?
have a
Got it.
conversation about that later before we
Sorry,
make
got
final
it.
decisions and we monitor that. Yes, go back.
Go back one, just because we don't have this one, so.
Right.
Oh, okay, all right, I've got all that. Yeah. All right, thanks.
Art, are you up to speed on the non-lapsing and?
Probably not. Yeah.
I've had a small briefing on it.
Okay.
There is scope for further.
We only have about 4 more hours tonight, so we'll try to, but be glad to.
Well, members of the, why don't you give a summary, because there may be members of the public who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, so it's an amount that has carried forward, right?
Right. So it's state statute that I want to say 7 years ago, maybe?
Not
6 years
quite,
ago?
but
Not
yeah.
quite that long? We had a discussion about amongst our boards that the legislation allows you to carry up to 1% of your total operating cost and almost a contingency fund called the non-lapsing account. And any decisions to be made on how to spend those dollars need to be a joint conversation, a joint agreement of the Board of Finance. So on an annual basis, we look at those dollars and ways we can potentially utilize them. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, and those dollars have been carried over year to year.
So it's an ongoing reserve that doesn't lapse.
Correct.
Correct.
Hence the name.
I will point out in last year's legislative session, the legislature passed that you can now go up to 2%.
They're not interested.
Point of information.
He hasn't been at all 8 of these. So the other piece, just for purposes of the presentation, is the non-public school budget that does go to referendum as well. That's the portion of the budget that funds nursing services, mental health support services to our private schools, as well as transportation services to our private schools. Many people don't realize the fact that as a local school district, we are responsible for that in either mileage payments or provide busing. So currently, we provide busing with St. Mary's, mileage reimbursement to the other schools.
Is it just St. Mary's, or is it the master school?
St. Mary's for actual busing transportation.
Oh, okay.
Mileage for the rest.
Mileage for the rest, yeah. So that is it on the operating side. I don't know if we want to talk about capital and roll it all in, or if you guys want to ask questions you have now, or we're open to however you want to do it.
I think, do you want to ask questions about the operating budget first?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. And
Okay.
then we'll talk about capital. Who wants to go first?
You're our fearless leader.
Yeah, so my, one question I had, besides a lot of things I circled, was this the
Reserves?
yeah, the reserve for the contracts and negotiations. So, because the way it's presented, and this happened last year and happens every year, you can't really track.
Right.
There's 227,000 that was, when you compare where it was in the budget, it just doesn't, the whole thing doesn't flow to me. So I was actually most interested in, if we set aside 227,000, how have we done in the past when we actually settle those contracts? Are we pretty good at predicting that, or?
Yeah, I would say pretty good, and I would just ask Kira to kind of go through the document so you can get a read of it.
Right, so I took our 1920, I'm showing what we had originally budgeted, which would have been 204,395. That was our contracted, what was our reserve for unnegotiated contracts in the year that we're sitting. So at this time last year, we were talking about the 204. So since then, in this year, the second column will tell you how it actually translated.
Which page are you looking at?
The handout I just handed you?
Oh, this is a handout.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Where's
know
the
why you
204
handed
in
that
there?
to us.
I got it.
So I broke it down, just as we do when we budget it, I broke it down into the different categories. If you actually went back to the infamous green pages that we have in our last budget, compared it to the green pages that we have now, you're going to see, in some cases, it's spot on. And in other cases, there's some differences because things change. When we're planning this out at this time of year, for instance, a good example is the first line in the general control, which is our business office and central office staff. Now, when I did this initially, we calculated initially my base, which is the salaries that exist in that year, changed. For an example, we had 3 retirements in 1920, replaced by people obviously on a lower end of the scale. So my base was reduced. So my budget transfer is not what I originally had projected. But that happens because you just can't predict the future. I mean, it would be nice, but we can't, obviously. So that's an example of where it starts in one place and ends up in another.
Is it true, Kara, that you actually the actual was exactly what the reserve was? That seems almost impossible.
Exactly what the, no, it wasn't. So the reserve, oh, I see, you're looking at the bottom line?
Yeah,
Well, what can happen is, for, you know, again, it goes back to not really being able to predict exactly where all of the dollars are going to go. But in this case, when I look to see, okay, I did better in one area, do I have some problems in another area? So for instance, transportation. There's always needs for special education transportation. I don't always know what those needs are 6 months ahead of before the year is, but when I walk in, I have a better handle on it. So again, it relates back to contractually what we have to do for transportation.
okay, so this raises real questions for me, which says, is what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that you spent all the money that was in the reserve.
Correct.
But it wasn't all spent on contractual things. Some was spent on transportation and
Well, and
operation of plant
transportation
and
is
food.
contractual. I mean, it depends on how you look at it.
Oh, it's on the
Yeah, so,
salary.
in that reserve line item, one item that has historically been in there is our contract with Salters.
Correct.
So in this
These
year's
are all
actual, a change in this year's greens and pinks is we pulled that estimate out for the first time to try to make it a little cleaner, that this is just the unnegotiated kind of personnel contracts that we have. But transportation has always sat in that line item.
Yeah,
But I
so
did
what
give
I
you
was,
apples
what
to
I
apples.
was expecting to see was over a 5-year period, that some of the times the reserve would be too high and some of the time it would be too low, because you can't really tell what it would be, and they would even out. But what you're saying is that we can expect that $282,000 to be spent. It's not, it's,
I build that reserve based on what I feel our needs are, so yes,
okay.
yes, that is the expectation.
Here, just a quick question, and this is just an accounting difference, the way you do it and the way Maria does it. In our budget book this year, if you look at the budget for last year, it says there was no reserve.
Right.
But if you look at the book that you gave us last year, the reserve says it was 204,395. So how would we know that unless we went back to?
That's
I mean,
that's
why do
really-
we do
Well,
it
so it
that
comes
way?
down to a presentation
Yeah.
Yeah.
scenario. So we can certainly do that.
Change it.
But what-
Whatever makes most sense.
You
It's
pull it
just
out
that-
'cause it
it's
gets
just
pl-
that
it gets placed in the different
Yeah, it
accounts.
gets placed in other buckets.
Yeah,
So
but it
if
does
I'm
two things.
comparing-
I don't, this really was why I asked the question, is that it bothers me on two levels. It implies that there's this huge increase in the reserve from nothing to 200,000. So it overstates
Terms of the
that,
percentage.
and it understates the increase in salaries and the places where this money will actually be reallocated, so that it really doesn't tell us anything about, the actual. I mean, we see the bottom line, which is fine. It's just a presentation thing.
It is, it's a presentation.
Okay.
Can think through that, yep.
Yeah, it's the same comment we made to Maria last year. It's helpful for us to do year-to-year comparisons and just to see what was, I understand your budget is a little different because your bottom line budget,
Okay,
so
yeah.
you do the transfers
Yeah.
different than Maria, but it would be helpful
Yeah.
to see the year-to-year.
That's certainly doable.
And I'll just amplify on that one little tiny bit. In the yellow pages, when you explain salaries, administrative, it says there's no increase. But that's
That's the point.
presumably because
Correct.
you haven't finished
You haven't settled those
negotiating the
things yet.
administrators.
And we
Except
follow
that on
that
the
in-
first page, you give an exact percentage of what the GWI is going to be. So how do you know what the GWI is if you haven't really negotiated it yet?
There's building administrators and central office.
Central office administrators are not contractual.
So that's the percent increase that's in the book.
So the 2.25% is
Which page are you on, Linda? So
on the
I'm,
very, 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 very first page of the entire, the white summary page. Looking at that,
15, I believe it is.
No, it's the.
no, the very, very
literally
first
the
page
first.
of our
I see, okay, I got
entire
you.
notebook. It's a white page.
Got it.
Memorandum to members of the
very
board.
first page.
okay.
It says administrators 2.25.
So that is our SASSA administrative contractual group of principals and assistant principals.
And that's a settled contract.
So that's a settled contract.
Okay, because then when you go to page 15 and look at administrative office, it says no increase.
So.
And that's because,
SASSA group is our principals and our other school administrators, so they're not in that general control
Okay.
group, they're in the instructional group.
Right. This is central office administrators who are
Right. Different-
basically
different administrators.
unaffiliated
okay.
employees.
All right, I see.
Yep.
And even though there was a presumption as to what went into the reserve, we choose not to put that in the book because we don't want to bias the
Right.
actual negotiation, right?
Correct.
Question about administration when it's appropriate, Rob.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I'm good on specific questions, but
Okay.
go ahead.
I'm wondering how you, or what your philosophy and approach is, and also how you determine administrative costs. I understand the teaching. You set a curriculum, you have one teacher for a certain range of students, and the math follows. Is there a ratio for administrators, either per students or per teachers, per number of teachers? Is there a best practice or a goal that you aim for?
Not necessarily a best practice that's clearly defined at the elementary level. Kind of a standard that people look at is the enrollment level of 500 students. So if you are an elementary administrator at a Latimer Lane school or a central school, enrollment below 500, you would be the sole administrator in that building. If enrollment goes over 500, obviously the number of evaluations with teachers, number of non-certified staff, student needs often predicate discussion about adding an assistant principal. So we have one assistant principal amongst all our elementary schools, and that's at Squadron, which has a much larger enrollment.
What is your personal preference in terms of structure? There are some school systems that like the top-heavy. They like a superintendent, a lot of principals and deputy principals, and fewer at the lower level. Others like to make it as flat as they possibly can and take advantage of information technology. In other words, you have a couple of people at the top, very few deputies, very few assistants, and the doers are at the lower level. What's your personal preference for structure?
In terms of leadership philosophy,
For determining what your administrative structure is?
I mean, one of the challenges is we have separate satellite operations, right? So I need a leader at each one of those satellite operations. So that to me is pretty bare bones. I mean, it's one per building. So I don't think it's an overly innovative approach, to be honest with you, Art, but it's really management in needs in terms of both being in charge of teaching and learning and in charge of everything else that comes with it. I certainly don't believe in a top-heavy organization, which I don't think we have. My conversation and dialogue about different models in leadership would really be about, from a curriculum standpoint, should we look at more of a vertical articulation between K-12 leaders, or how we have it segmented now, which is 9-12, K-6, and 7-8. Those actually are not administrative union positions for us. They're more teacher leadership positions, but that's the bulk of the actual bodies of people that do leadership work in our district.
School districts which are seeking to have higher scores, such as you described, what are they finding the optimal administrative structure to be in terms of positions which are being added and positions which are being de-emphasized?
Yeah, I think one of the kind of more innovative approaches that you're seeing is putting more boots on the ground. They call them instructional coaches, people that are working with teachers to support curriculum, support kids with varied needs, whether they're high-level learners or they're struggling learners. So getting that work closer to the classroom level has been important. Again, they're not administrative positions, Art. We have very few administrative positions to work with, but I think that is a trend and something that we're seeing as effective. Our board supported that in terms of math improvement over the past couple years. Our math overall achievement is not where our language arts achievement is at the elementary level. So they supported instructional coaches to really get in and work with the one administrator at the elementary school level in terms of defining how we work with our teams of teachers. So I think it boots closer to the ground, I guess, long story short is what I'm getting at.
I
Have more of an
understand.
impact to support our teachers.
And it's always difficult to discipline. I mean, you can always add an administrator, there's always more work to be done.
Right.
Where are the economies to be made? If that is the area in which you would like to see growth take place, and I hear your argument, where are areas where you would look to be more restrictive?
In savings, in personnel?
Yeah.
You know, one area that we've seen great escalation in cost over time has been in non-certified staffing. So if you go back and look at the historical, that long data sheet we've provided, you can see that our certified staffing levels over time, meaning our teaching staff, they go up and down appropriately with enrollment. There's no great variance there. Our administrative positions have not gone up or down significantly with enrollment. Our non-certified staffing has. So for us, it's, how do we look at servicing those students that have significant needs? That population has grown. That's a population we want to support to the best of our abilities. Our board has been very supportive of that. But can we look at different models and how we deliver some of those services to kids that aren't as reliant on staffing potentially? Our conversations we're having, because the savings for us, not to oversimplify it, it's in the people. We don't have a lot of costs that are outside of our head count.
I have a few minor ones.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Matt, and thank you to the members of the Board of Ed who are here today. You know, I value what you do. I have two boys who went through the system and are doing very well. Can you hear me, Lydia? You're welcome. One of my questions is just sort of broad, and I don't necessarily expect you to answer it tonight, but I saw that you had a tree line item. I know that Parks and Rec has a new tree ash borer line item. I know Public Works has an ash borer tree. Is there some way, maybe perhaps we could work together in a comprehensive approach so that it isn't piecemeal over time? And are you seeing ash borer as a potential problem to in the way the town is? And if you are, is this an opportunity to work together for a comprehensive approach instead of coming to the Board of Finance piecemeal on this issue that we know is growing? So, I don't know.
I would just say in general, we're having more conversations than we have in the past, certainly about different ways to share services. I'm not as familiar with the ash borer tree issue, so
But you have fewer trees.
impacting school grounds, but it's something I can certainly look into.
It struck me that your line item on tree trimming was flat, where everyone else is growing exponentially because of the ash borer, and it may be that you have fewer ash trees.
Could be.
So I was just wondering, but that's one thing that struck me. One question for Amy, just last Board of Finance meeting, and I'll just confirm, our actuary is still recommending a 6.5% pension investment assumption, so that's as a best practice. So my philosophy on that, and I don't know if this board will agree, is if we make a promise, we should keep a promise. And we promised a pension, we should pay the actual cost of it, not do what the state did. So if it is expensive to offer pensions, okay, let's be honest about it and tax for it. So that's where I am with that. But just putting that out there, and I don't know that there will be consensus on there, but I did want to get that out there because I do feel very strongly about that. And Matt, you did close your pensions to unaffiliated a couple years ago, right? Can you
Correct.
just speak to that?
New hires are closed, yeah. 2012, yeah.
And
So
is
for
that
some
new
time.
hires for?
All non-teaching and any pension eligible employee that would come to the town, because all our certified staff and certified administrators' pensions are with the state of Connecticut.
So the last employee to go into a defined benefit plan was in 2012?
2011.
Our cutoff was January 1st.
Congratulations. Excellent.
And then, sort of, Linda and I were just talking about sort of utilities in general, And they're also piecemeal within the budget, and we were trying to map out who's doing what. And obviously, I know at the Board of Selectmen meeting, they highlighted the discrepancies in electricity budgeting. Is there some way we can get a comprehensive look at different utility costs all on one page? I don't know if that's complicated, hard to do. I know you have spreadsheets, but if you could, it would be just sort of helpful to understand who's doing well, who's not, why they're not. Is it because of service enhancements? Is it because we haven't upgraded Windows?
Are we using the
It came
same
up in part
assumptions?
because
Right, are we using the same assumptions?
Yeah.
I was struck by the 9.12% increase in fuel costs for you, which struck me as, I wasn't expecting to see such a high increase. And actually, after the Saudi-Russian thing.
I was gonna say, as of
probably-
yesterday.
They probably
we're gonna be
can
doing
cut
quite
that back a
well.
little bit. But we wondered, okay, well, geez, are we seeing that kind of a 9% increase on the Board of Selectmen side? So that's, Lisa and I were
Okay.
saying, let's get a comparison across both ends of the spectrum here.
And then just in your CNR, there was just a note that I didn't understand, and you said your projections are to spend this amount if the Board of Finance approves using $115,000 from reserves. Can you speak to what that is
Yeah, that-
and what
that-
that's for?
I scratched my head on that one.
115?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's dated, that went back, I think we might be in the fifth year. So 5 years ago, 115 was taken out of reserves to subsidize our CNR over a 5-year period.
So are we at
So
the
that
end of
goes back 5 years.
So is this the 5th year of
I
that?
believe this is the fifth year.
So it's only 23,000.
So it's only 23,000 per year, that's all it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just didn't understand what that was referencing.
Yeah, again, that's a 5-year-old, back 5 years, that was the decision made to use reserves
So every year
and
we
help.
transfer 23,000, and this is the
Correct.
last year of that transfer.
I
Okay, that's
believe,
what I
yes,
just
it should be
didn't
the last
understand.
year.
Okay,
Yes.
and that's all I had.
Are you good?
I had one question which I talked with Matt about earlier, and that has to do with, well, first off, I wanted to get the individual report that we used to get that showed class-by-class enrollment. Nerd that I am, I like to look at that, that level of detail. But I also just wanted to ask a little bit, because it has come up from constituents frequently, about the age, the numerical range for guidance on class size. And if you could give me a little bit of background about why your range was expanded on the low end but not on the high end.
So, it came out of a discussion here on the way we used to present that class size report that reported how many classes were above class size guidelines and how many were below. And there was a lot of discussion for many years of why are so many below.
Right.
And I would explain that there are just certain ways you divide numbers that, for us, the higher number of that range served as more of a cap than.
That's just what I've been saying for years. Why
So-
call it a range? Just call it a ceiling.
Why call it a range when it's truly a cap? So in grades K through 2, where that went up to 22, and then 3 through 6, and many of our high school and middle school classes, that went up to 25. For us, when we were making the real hard decisions, those served, we might go up to 23, but probably not beyond that, and we might go to 26, but probably not beyond that. It served as more of a cap. And yet the range was 21 to 25.
Right.
So if you got a number like 54, and you said, okay, I'm not gonna make this 2 classes of 27 in second or third grade, this third grade, let's say, that's not appropriate, and I divide that now into 3 classes of 18,
Right.
our range used to say 21 to 25, and it would flag that decision
Right.
as you have too many low classes. And yet, we would come and say, well, what other decision would you want me to make?
Right. No, I think there are times when it's defensible, and there've been a couple times where I've said,
Yeah.
just
Right.
why did you make so many classes? You could have had
Right.
actually a lower number of classes and still been within range.
Right. So when the range was 21 to 25, you take our situations that you're choosing that between an elementary school that might have 50 to 75 students in the cohort, and are we going to make this into 2 or 3? when it was 21 to 25, you had actually a narrow range of numbers that could get you to make a choice that was in the range.
Right.
So, once you hit 51 would have been too big, I have to make it 26 or 25, or I have to make it 317s and now it's too low.
Yeah.
So all the numbers in the 50 would force you to make a decision out of the range. And so we said, let's make a policy that makes the range more reasonable, because a more reasonable range actually reflects our philosophy that the higher number is the cap. And that's, we had a lot of discussion about that at the Board of Ed Policy Committee. And it was a comment that you might have made 3 years ago where you said, it sounds like you might have a policy problem. And we took you at your word for that and brought it back to our policy committee and said, we are overly reporting classes that are below the range, and yet it was an appropriate decision. It was a completely appropriate decision, and yet we're reporting it as below the range. And that's where we came on that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is, we're destined to have this conversation.
Every year.
At least once a year.
I'd be disappointed if you didn't ask.
But it does speak to one issue, which is part of what we are about to embark on, one way or the other, which is not the optimal class size, but the optimal school size. Because when you added 3 more students at Squadron Line and Latimer Lane, you could hire 1 more teacher and move it down and go from 4 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
If you only had 2 first grades, which is true for some of our smaller schools,
Mm-hmm.
you would have added a teacher also, but then you would have had 3 classes of only 15 people.
Correct. There's definitely,
And that's where the idea of the optimal school size, and I know this is very, very hot
Yeah.
and third rail topic, but it's why we commissioned a $200,000 study of not just what condition the buildings were in, which we now know, and not just 6th grade at the middle school, but it's quality of education, efficiency of education, and the burden on the taxpayers, which is what we care about. So when there is a difference, your math is absolutely correct, Neil,
yeah,
but it's different depending on how big the elementary school is
Yes.
and how many cohorts they have there.
I,
And that's one of the things
Your
I think
classic
we really
example,
want
Rob, is
to.
Squadron Line over the years, when it was upwards of, back when your kids were there, and I was the principal, 900, 6 sections of everything. And,
never missed a
Terriffill
range.
as a school community or Central, which only has the capacity to have the physical space to have either 2
Well, I was gonna say, you
or
run
3
into,
rooms.
yeah, the
Of
flip
each.
side of that is you don't have an actual physical room
Don't
to
have
put
the
them
room
in.
to do it, right,
So,
correct.
there are solutions to these issues that we need to be engaged in, as we discussed. I thought it was a very, very good meeting that you guys had last Wednesday night, talking mostly about the quality of the education and the impact of all of this. And I'm getting ahead of myself, but what we need to do is put both the physical condition of the buildings, the quality of the delivery of the educational product, should 6th graders be, 7th, 8th, all of those things we talked about Wednesday night. And then we have to add a very, very, very important element of this is, what is the most affordable and efficient way for us to educate our children in a community of 20-some thousand people that has to pay for it? So we're looking forward to that.
well, we didn't get into it at that particular meeting. If you were to, as one microcosm of that argument, say, move the 6th grade all to one place, instead of having them in 5 different schools, you would clearly pick up an efficiency of, right now, it would take us like 17 teachers across 5 schools to do 6th grade. We would need 2 or 3 fewer 6th grade teachers to teach those kids if they were all in one place.
What
So-
you have to look at, though, is what's the payback period? So you'd save
Yeah.
2 or 3 salaries, let's just say that's $250,000 a year, how many years of $250,000 do you have to save in order to pay back the $50,000 building
Right.
you're gonna build to put sixth
Right.
grade there?
Right.
So,
Which is,
like.
20,
just say-
20.
That's the difficult.
Not 50, 20.
Whatever, the difficult decision, you know, is how do you weigh that? And I don't have the perfect answer, but I
Yeah.
mean, that's what we need to
Yeah.
look at. I mean,
Sounds like
I
a
agree.
great transition point to capital.
It does, it
Exactly
does.
right.
All right.
But I don't want to cut the, are you?
No, I'm
you have-
done.
Oh, good,
Yep.
all right, so let's,
On to capital.
on to capital.
Okay,
And-
thank you.
And thank you for a very
Yep.
clear, good operating budget.
Yeah, I guess, I'll say the same thing. I wanted to just say that we really do acknowledge and appreciate that we gave you some guidance and you worked very, very hard to produce it. And I thought it was very, very thoughtful what you put together. And so, thank you for that.
Thank you. So, Jason Casey's going to come up and talk about our two capital projects this evening. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to tee it up just a little bit from some of the questions I've received and some of the work that, Rob, you talked about that's ongoing. So certainly, the significant priority we've been focused on the board this year is the master facility plan and kind of pivoting that conversation towards what is the first best option while we still define what the back end of that looks like. So I agree. I think our last meeting was a very productive conversation. We're working on a letter to go out to the community that summarizes that meeting, where we are with it, really clarifies those two options that will go out to everybody hopefully by the end of the week. So I think that's a positive. We had talked about, Rob, having the leaders of the boards just come together at this point, once we get through the budgets, and say, okay, are we at a point where the synergy can come together, and what would the Board of Finance like to see in an update from the financial side? Because I recognize, and our board recognizes, how important it is to start modeling a little bit and what that looks like over a period of time. So with that being said, the other caveat is the back end of this six-year plan, the work that's on there for the 5 years, which is largely kind of athletic in nature. We had talked last year as we worked into this that I don't want to say we're not paying attention to those other 5 years, but knowing we have that comprehensive work going on right now, we fully recognize that that'll all have to be reprioritized. So our board did not spend a lot of effort in conversation about out-year projects that are on that plan, knowing that it'll look completely different when our conversations advance. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay. And we did at the tri-board discuss this whole timeline for capital.
Right.
And we're anxious to get into that, but we're planning now that we will do it comprehensively after the budget season in collaboration with the town's long-range capital plan.
Perfect.
And the two main goals there would be, one, take the long view and look at layered bonding and layered projects going further, as far out in time as is reasonable to expect. And then the second is to try to get a sense of what the magnitude of a true long-range project will have over time for the taxpayers in terms of where we are today, how much the outstanding debt will be as these projects get layered in, and what could that mean?
Right.
So will be a goal for a meeting. I think we're talking in the June timeframe. So as soon as we get this done, we need to do that.
Yep.
All right?
Agreed.
Fair enough.
Yep.
Thank
So
you.
Jason has two projects in the current year that he's going to present and then can respond to
Okay.
questions. Oh, I get to drive.
Get safe from here.
I never get that response.
What did he ask?
I missed that.
So with,
I get to flick his,
Oh, yeah, nice. Highest and best use.
So yes, we have our district network infrastructure dollars and our stadium bleacher project as the two capital initiatives that we're going to be talking about. The stadium bleachers comes up because with the future focus being on the elementary schools and the current today focus being on Henry James finishing their excuse me, finishing their construction project, that leaves the high school in need of its capital project being worked on. And this has been the high school's highest priority. So if I can,
How many press members come to the games?
the press box is actually used for announcements, so we see more of the other teams going up there doing their announcements, our team doing its announcements. It's a high vantage point area.
It's in addition to, well, SCTV is up there. They do a great job. And then there are the coaches in the NFL, the coaches who are up in the booth. There are high school coaches who go up there.
Which teams use that? Because if you go on SCTV, the only thing you see filmed are football.
Football uses it, rugby uses it, lacrosse uses it, soccer, track, not to mention
They
things
use the
like
high thing,
cheerleaders
right?
and all the other parts of the football team that go
The
there.
cheerleaders use the press box?
Well, I'm saying that
Oh.
the bleachers and the press box in this facility is used by hundreds of
Oh,
students,
no,
staff,
no,
and
no,
parents.
I was just talking about the
year,
press
yeah.
box. Because if
Oh,
you go on
okay.
Simsbury Community Television, you say, okay, well, who's being filmed on the field? It's only the football team.
No.
On Simsbury Community Television, when you look there. So the question is, so just what they have listed, so that's why I'm asking. Because if you just go there, you think, oh, they're only filming football. So the question is, are they filming other things?
They're doing every football game, but they're doing selected rugby games, lacrosse games, soccer games. The other stuff that's going on up there is the operators of the scoreboard and the PA announcer and all of that.
That's what I was looking for,
Yeah.
okay.
And I can start with the stadium if that's where we wanted to begin, that's fine, kind of on the. But the current bleachers and press box were built in 1968. They were expected to have a 30 to 40 year lifespan, now going on 52 years. And this is not the first time we've made mention of this. We've had issues, back in 2018, there was some repairs done because of rotting wood. So this is really something that year over year of the last few years, we've known we've had to do, which puts it into the high school's list of priorities up the top. All right.
Are there other sources that you can look to?
Yeah, it's good.
For?
Sell the naming rights?
Yeah. Or,
Not something we've done, but
you know, I don't know,
other
boosters?
parts of the country are starting to do quite a bit of that, actually,
Yeah.
with high school athletic facilities.
I mean, I personally have to say, I'm not a sports fan. I like to play sports, I don't watch them. So I maybe don't get the importance of this, but knowing that you're gonna be coming to us looking for $100+ million in the coming years, that's gonna suck up a humongous amount of capital, this just doesn't feel like an urgent thing. And Matt and I had talked about that as well, and frankly, I am concerned, and I've said this to both Matt and Maria, that, as we go forward with your master plan, that it's not gonna leave a lot of room for other things that are on the very long list of capital items that the Board of Selectmen needs. And so maybe there's something that they should move forward this year, and you delay that a little bit until you have your whole master plan. And
So, we talked about that a little bit, and, the reality is there's a need. Can we get another year, another 2 years, and look at things differently? I mean, we've always done that, we can do that, and if this is conversation we need to think about at the board in terms of how this fits in the overall plan, we can always go back and have those conversations. I did have some conversation with the athletic director about that. I mean, we do have some issues, significant ADA issues with this. The need for, bleachers, and I'm not being tongue-in-cheek, is you get big crowds out there, they need a place to go, they need a place to sit. I mean, every stadium that you go to has these things. So this isn't a luxury, but I understand the price tag that's on it. And I would leave it at that. I mean, it's absolutely a need. Does it have to be done right now? I mean, those are conversations we can have in a larger scope of where we are. But it's not like we can ignore this and not come back to it. And if this got shut down, we'd have a real problem on our hand we'd be forced to respond to.
Yeah. I just know some of the other athletic teams raise their own money. For example, the crew team didn't they raise the money to build the boathouse?
I don't know the history of the boathouse. That
Okay,
came
I
up
could
to
be
me
wrong, but I thought they
the other
did.
day. I really don't. I mean, our sports teams do raise money for different things.
Okay.
Major Capital hasn't been a history of
Right.
things they've run.
I would just say we need to remember that those bleachers are also used by the youth sports teams in town. It is not solely the high school and their student body. So
By the what sports team?
it's youth football, youth soccer, youth, all, the Hershey track meet. There are plenty of other events outside of the high school events that are there. So it's something to keep in mind when we're putting the public on the bleachers that are 20 years past useful life.
And do they contribute towards?
Do they
We don't charge
community
in
events?
community events. It's like using our gymnasiums. It's part of, we schedule that with them, but we don't make revenue on that. And it's a field that's used for every major sport, every major track field. I know it's fixated a little bit on football, but it's beyond football.
Is there a way to sort of cost out the different aspects of the project? Like, what do you need to do for safety? Like, that's obviously the top priority. So what are the things that need to be done immediately? Can you value engineer it, I guess, and phase it in over time if there's a need to do that?
I know that the history when we went, and I was working with Burke on a little of this, I don't think we have that detail now, but there's a major storage unit underneath the bleachers. I don't know if people have looked at that. The infrastructure of the bleachers goes right through the storage unit, which makes it a complexity to
So you
repair.
need to do them both the same.
When we looked at
Right.
it, the recommendation was it's not going to be beneficial to patchwork
Got it.
this thing over time.
And then, I don't know, Maria, did you provide detail sheets on these projects when we got our project details? I didn't see mine in the packet.
I don't think we have for the Board of Ed project.
Could we get the capital detail sheets, the capital request form, and just so that we know what the project is? Do you guys do that still? I mean,
We may have missed that piece in the transition with moving, so if we need to provide something, we can
just a little
absolutely go
more
back and do that.
detail.
Yeah, yep.
Like it talks about how you're gonna fund it,
The
all that.
background sheet. I know where
It
you're
looks
going.
like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
We can
thank
get
you.
that to you,
Thank you.
absolutely.
The second item is the District Network Infrastructure Fund. We have this funding coming up each year. This particular year is a little different in that we have two major projects coming due simultaneously. We have a group of servers that runs our infrastructure beyond just the normal things that servers do because we're a virtualized infrastructure. We're talking about servers that provide the actual Windows desktops to all of the classrooms. Right now, those desktops are on Windows 7.
Yeah.
The current servers that are serving them up are not capable of running the virtualization software updates that would allow them to go to Windows 10. So this is a year that we really have to take care of these hardware issues as Microsoft is no longer supporting Windows 7, so that becomes important. Simultaneously, our routers that route the bulk of the district's traffic, not the bulk, all of the district's traffic, both internally and out to the internet, have gone past their end-of-life date, and we're also starting to see some glitchy behavior that we've been working on a case-by-case basis with, but these absolutely have to get taken care of as well. So it's a little higher than what we've normally asked for year over year for district network infrastructure. We saw this coming, and we're supplementing this with some funds we had set aside from the previous to take care of that together this year.
Again, the collaboration question is are the Board of Ed's servers totally separate from the towns, or is this integrated?
In this case, this would be a separate endeavor. We were on different tracks when they went to their virtualization piece, when we went to ours.
There's no synergies that could be gained by, can they work together? I don't know, I'm asking questions I don't know the answers to, but any economies of scale or?
essentially
Are we
not.
replicating the same kind of capacity, town versus Board of Ed?
It's a very different use case, and if we were to build out what we've set up for the district for town use, at the risk of sounding glib, it would be too much for what the town is using them for. A lot of the classroom technology need has to do with video and real-time things, writing on a smart board and having that interaction taking place. It requires a lot more processing, a lot more memory than on the town side does. So one of our early discussions was that bringing the town equipment into that environment would force us to overbuild on a per
For what the
desktop
town
for what the
needs.
town needs.
So does the town have servers that are Windows 10 capable?
Yeah, their desktops are.
Okay. All right, that's fine.
So the systems will be compatible, they'll be able to interact, more or less.
Well, they're two systems doing the same thing in the end. They're not directly interacting with each other, no.
But there's nothing in the design of them that says they couldn't, is I guess what I'm going to, if there needed to be a change at some time down the line. We're not going on alternate tracks, right? We're all thinking.
So we're
the
not
same.
IT people. What we're asking is there, it's really obvious, but is it?
Windows 10 can
Is
talk
there a
to
need for $500,000 at the town that is duplicative of the $500,000 that you need? And the answer.
No.
No, that's the right answer. The short answer is always the best answer. That's really what we're trying to assess. I don't think this is controversial at all. It needs to be done.
Yeah.
Windows 7 is ancient history.
Right. Ultimately, we have two uses for the Windows desktops. And we have a system on the board side that addresses a higher processing need than the town side does. So it is two separate systems effectively accomplishing the same thing, but ultimately develops the right efficiency.
Okay.
But there's still shared storage and disaster recovery.
Disaster recovery is shared with the town, yes. Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. That's a wrap?
I think so,
Is
but
there
I think.
CNR stuff?
What's that?
Isn't there CNR? We didn't talk about.
There is, well,
CNR.
Lisa asked one question about the
Right.
$15,000 or the.
115.
Oh, that's right, you got that answer.
115,000.
Okay.
All right. So, but I think what we do need to is be sure we're all clear on what happens from here and next. I don't, Amy, you'd said that the possibility we could refer this, I think we want to listen to the town budget and have a conversation that's comprehensive about the capital, certainly, because your capital goes with your capital before we refer these to a public hearing. I think we probably should think about, and then at part of that, this question of the timing of the bleachers and the extent of it. I'm not saying no, I'm just saying that I think we'll have that discussion in conjunction with the overall capital budget.
Will that be the meeting where you start pulling on the levers for the mill rate worksheet and looking at different things there?
Yes.
Okay.
I hope so.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm making promises that Amy has to keep.
Sorry, Amy.
But yes, and I think, so for
We'll be there
the
for that
Board of
too.
Finance,
Yeah.
I'll say out loud that we need to decide a few things before we send these budgets to the public hearing and then on to referendum. One is, are we going to ask you to put in the 6.5 pension plan? Straw poll here would probably say yes, so if you want to get started on that, I would put that in. And the second would be the capital projects comprehensively. All right? I think
right.
we've had our chance to ask you questions about the line item. Again, I think, just for me, it was very responsible and responsive budget effort, and we appreciate that.
It's a great
Thank you
budget.
very much.
Yeah.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Yeah.
And we'll also look at of course, the Barbara Pettigene chart.
The all important.
The infamous Barbara Pettigene.
Okay, so now, you're all welcome to stay, because we have some riveting topics to discuss before we finish. But,
Can we take a 2-second break? So
We may.
Or you can carry on, but I'm going to go.
I think, yeah, okay.
Thanks, we're almost done.
I don't know who he.
All right. Let's wrap up here.
Heavner right out the window.
All right, the proposed clean water bond refunding.
Yes.
I'm excited.
So our financial advisors reached out to us. There's a lot of demand in the market right now for treasury bonds and high-rated municipal securities. So our Clean Water Fund bond currently has a 2% interest rate, and we are able to refinance that at about, I think he estimated 0.85%. So that would be a savings in the total loan of $260,000. That loan is shared with Granby and Avon, so our portion would be about $175,000. Yep, $175,760, and that would go all into the sewer use fund to benefit the users.
Okay. This seems extremely non-controversial. Money for free?
My only question is, can we do this on any other bonding?
We've asked our financial advisor, and when they came out previously, and there's nothing that they.
There's a early.
There's nothing that would outweigh the cost would outweigh the benefit.
Oh, okay, so they're already low
there are
enough.
costs up
Right.
front, and then
Yeah.
there's also some of our bonds not callable, any?
Right, some of them are not callable, and the
reasonable.
ones that are, they've already done the analysis. Yep.
So I move that we, you want a motion, right?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I move that we approve this.
Second. Oops, sorry.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, great. And the finance director's report? All right, I feel bad, I've got all of your
Go
stuff.
ahead and use it, you need it, go ahead.
Huh?
Yeah, just give it to me at the end.
Yeah.
There's not really much on this. No update since the last meeting. We're still scheduled to have our meeting on March 23rd with FIA to go over the responses for the RFQ related to the record-keeping services. So nothing new there. And then the Town Aid Road Grant, we heard a little bit tonight, but over the course of the last 4 weeks, I've gotten 2 different stories from the state. So one was that the bond package was going to be approved last week, and we would have gotten our funding by mid-March. And now they want to do the bond package all at once. And they're saying it could delay it at least 1 to 2 months before we receive our funding. So just an update on that. That's all I got.
So I feel like we need to somehow schedule, so this whole thing about defined contribution and defined benefit pension plans. So I thought we had a clear understanding that we
Right.
were gonna
So
not
did I.
put any
New people
more,
in there.
any new hires
Yeah.
into the defined benefit plan. And apparently that's not, hasn't been communicated, or there has, so I'm asking if we need a formal action as a Board of
close it.
Finance to do that? To change, or is that even in our purview, or is that in the town of, the Board of Selectmen?
So the Board of Selectmen is the ratifying body for all of our collective bargaining agreements. So in terms of all employee benefits, they would really be the ultimate decision maker in terms of what's offered, what's not offered. Typically what we've been doing is leading up to negotiations before we begin negotiating with the group. We meet in non-notice meetings to discuss strategy and throughout, and generally benefit strategy is part of that discussion.
So I'm not suggesting that we change the collective bargaining agreements that have, as part of them, but I understood from the last meeting that we have non-union employees who still have the option to elect the defined benefit plan, and that was a shocking surprise to me, because I thought we had a clear understanding. Now, it's before your time that this was communicated from what I thought was the Board of Finance.
Actually, I'm the Board of Selectmen. Sean was a big advocate of that.
Yeah.
I was a big advocate, but there was no ratify, because we. Ratifying of that is we negotiate with each person as they come in on a non-affiliated basis. So as part of the town manager's contract negotiation, which we all signed off on and saw and was in public, that was part of it. So
I think we're just saying you had an opportunity, you hired 6 unaffiliated. They're just as
we
we.
could say no, yes.
Yeah.
But then but the flip side is I know for a fact that in 3 of these cases, had we not offered the DB plan, we would have not acquired the individual. So again, trust me, I'm all for getting rid of DB plans, but
So the way you get
there's-
around that is you close it.
Yeah.
You just close
There
it
isn't
to
an
any
option.
new hires, and then they can come work for us or not. And just because this seems to me to be fundamental, at least that's there's a personal position that I have, but I thought it was something, we talked about this, and I agree with you, we never took any action, but, Tom
Board of
was,
Ed has managed to hire people.
since 2012.
Yeah.
So I don't understand that it's that compelling, but,
You can make an argument, and I'm not going to throw stones on the quality of talent you get. It's always been the flip side, and Lisa and I have had 10 years of debates on that. But I think you still can get the talent, but there are those that...
in the private sector, you know this, that.
It doesn't exist anywhere.
Doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist
It
anywhere.
doesn't exist anywhere. In the municipal space, it still exists.
Although many town managers are closing, and I know Tallinn closed it, I know Avon closed it for police, so there are a lot of,
Look, I'm for it, but I don't want to degrade the talent pool as a result, and we end up saving $50 and we make mistakes. I want to make sure that we're doing it the right way.
so to the extent you find value in that, we should pay for the actual cost of it and not pretend that it's less by doing a 675 when our actuary is saying 6.5. So I would just say, if you think it is valuable and you need it, let's tax for it. Because you're making a promise for a pension, and so we should charge the taxpayers the actual cost of that
Our
pension.
investment return has been over 7%, so we're fulfilling.
So-
So we're not gonna have that discussion at.
If you want to debate me on that, we can.
Quarter of eight.
We are fulfilling our
Absolutely
promise.
will, absolutely
We're
will.
fulfilling our
So
promise.
I guess I would like somebody to research and tell us what we can or can't do and what the process would be if that's really something that the Board of Finance wants to.
Look, I'm with you on closing. If we have the ability to close it down for unaffiliated, I've been a proponent of that for as long as I've been on this board. We just need to do it with our eyes wide open and understand
Yeah.
all the
I think that's
repercussions.
what we're saying is,
Yeah.
let's make them,
Let's do the research and put it on the agenda.
It doesn't mean that people who have the
Yeah.
plan now would lose it.
No,
Just,
no,
yeah,
it's just keeps on going.
right.
Yeah.
I was surprised by
But
that.
it's one step, but the challenge is we have to have as part of the conversation the recruiting mechanism, and we need to understand, because there are pretty lucrative plans out there that we compete with. Again, I'm not saying it's a stopping block, but it's not as simple as we just close it down. The second part of it is, what is our long-term strategy for the 6 unions? And that is important as well, because once we start this, I think we should go all the way through with it.
So haven't they also closed?
2 have closed, correct?
Right, so 2 of our groups, new hires have the DC only. 3 of our groups, they have an option. The police plan, we are currently in arbitration over their pension contract. And we took a look at the numbers of the groups that have an option. Since those plans were implemented, we're seeing about 60 to 80% of the folks are actually picking the DC plan. So we're seeing some, trending, and even if the option is available, we're finding with those particular groups that more employees are actually picking the DC plan, even though the DV plan is still an option to them. And the unaffiliated group is a relatively small group of folks, including myself. I think we're talking about 10, maybe 11 full-time people. And some very, very wise advice I learned from a manager who was, in this business for a long time, and it was never give your non-union folks less than what you give to your union folks, because that's a quick way to getting more affiliated folks. And under MIRA, there really is just a very, very small number of non-union staff who could technically not be unionized. It's essentially my office, Amy, our police chief, and our public works director. So basically, there's like half a dozen, maybe 7 employees who could in theory be non-unionized under MIRA. So that's just something to sort of always keep in mind.
But I would also say that your negotiating position, when you're trying to negotiate away this defined benefit plan with the unions, it's a hard position to be in to say, well, but we're going to keep it for the top management. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, when you go to arbitration, they look for internal groups to see what you've done with your union groups. If you go and say, like, in arbitration, we're fighting for X benefit, but we've made the change for non-union staff, that really doesn't carry any weight, at least when you're going in arbitration. They want to see what you've done amongst your union internal peer groups generally.
I hear you loud and clear, though. We should endeavor to.
And I'm going to go back to the point that you raised, Sean, in terms of who should decide what the pension investment assumption is. And I think we have to rely on data, and we will, in the past, have always relied on an actuary. It's not, oh, I think we can beat the actuary's number. So if the actuary says something, I just think we need to follow best practice. What I'm worried about, and although this town has never done that, I'd never want to be in the position that the state was in. We're going to beat the odds. And so if we value the pension.
Let's go borrow money.
Right. And so that's why when I say, it's not because I think 6.5 is a good number, it's because I asked Amy, I think now I've asked 3 times, has that changed, has that changed? And every time. So let's use.
It's going to change to go down any minute.
Well, I mean, we saw what just happened,
After
right?
this week.
So anyone who has a 401k, if was thinking of retiring, they're going to work more years. With the pension, that doesn't change. Only those who are now have to save more for their retirement are going to pay more in taxes to pay for someone else to have a pension. So it's not that I disagree with the pension. I'm a big union person, actually. And I think that's why Social Security is so important, and we should invest in that all the more. But it's very hard to ask taxpayers to pay for someone's pension that they themselves are not getting. So that's the only, not to say, if there was a way, actually, Maria, to open up the pension to the citizens of Simsbury and let them pay their actual cost and join the pension, maybe that would make it more palatable, because you're offering something that they themselves who are paying taxes could benefit from. So I don't know if anyone even does that. But if you're laughing at that, then that begs the point.
Let's do some research on what would be involved in doing it, and part of that will be researching what the impact would actually be if we did it versus other towns and the rest. All right?
Yeah, and I apologize if there was confusion on our part, that was not intentional.
All right. We had little packets. These go in our
I move that we
budget.
approve the minutes.
Oh, yeah, please. When I get back my agenda, I'm lost.
There you go.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And I'll second that motion.
Good. Karen's taking notes.
And I move that we adjourn.
Yeah, and so these pages you gave us go in your book? The book? Okay. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.